Okay, welcome everyone again to Zoomed In Festival. Thank you everyone that's been watching so far today, and thank you for continuing to tune in into our absolute jam-packed event schedule. So today has been guest curated by Henry and Francesco of Mass Collective, and they need to dash in a moment to do some preparation for our final event today, which is at 8 p.m. Do you guys quickly want to say a bit about the program you put together with us today and what's going on? So why you selected Will and Edward today for their films, and then what's going on afterwards at 8 p.m?
Yeah, so we've chosen these two filmmakers because they're super talented. They're also part of our little Mass Collective, which is a London-based architectural photography collective that myself, Henry Boyd, and Francesco Russo, two London architectural photographers, founded. We basically founded this space so that we could share our personal work, business advice, and have a social space to share and engage with one another. So yeah, we thought it was really important to have filmmakers showing where architectural imagery is going and showing us some of their best projects that they've worked on. So I think Francesco will introduce us into the topic a little bit, and then we'll get cracking with that.
Hi everyone, Francesco here, and thanks Henry for the introduction. We have Will and Ed, which are both, as you mentioned, part of our collective, and it's going to be really important to hear from them because they have experience both as photographers and filmmakers in architecture. And we all know that in the two disciplines there's a very different approach. So it's going to be very interesting to see their videos and their what they have to say about the production of the videos. And yeah, so if you guys want to introduce yourself, Will and Ed. Will, you go first.
Just before we get into that, I forgot to introduce myself. So I'm Luke O'Donovan, the director of Zoomed In Festival, and we've got the Mass Collective program today, but also the rest of the week, Thursday and Friday. So zoomedinfestival.com, have a look on there at the rest of our program. But yeah, over to Will and Edward. We'll start with your film.
Okay, well, whoever wants to go first with the introduction, Will?
Okay, hi, I'm Will Scott. I'm a photographer and filmmaker from Scotland, based down in London now. And yeah, got a couple of films here to show you from last year, from two very different parts of the world. And I think they're quite a nice contrast to what Ed has to show. So I look forward to discussing them later on.
I'm Edward Bishop. I'm a photographer and filmmaker. I've been working as a filmmaker for 10 years or so, alongside my photography practice. And I am concerned with documenting the areas of art design and the built environment. I think the first film that you're probably going to see of mine is a film that Jim Stephenson and I, who work as a filmmaking duo together, made a few years ago now. I think it was our first commission for the Serpentine Gallery, and we made a film about Fujimoto's pavilion that summer.
Great, Ed. Is Luke gonna put that on the screen for us then? Here we go. Perfect.
So we're starting with the video screen first, yeah?
Just guys, if you could all mute your, stop your video and mute your microphone so we can see everything clearly. Thanks. That is yesterday's video. Apologies for that. If you just excuse me for a moment, I'm going to find the correct video. Here we go.
This is like a cloud, but of course, from the beginning, I didn't think about I like to make a cloud. But I was impressed by this beautiful surroundings of this Kensington garden, beautiful green. So try to create something melting into the green at the beginning. And of course the structure should be artificial. So I try to create something between architecture and the nature. And that kind of a concept has been my big interest in my career. So it is really natural to push that kind of concept to push more forward for the future. So these kind of grids, artificial grids, is representing the architectural order, but if it is quite many grids, then it is more organic and soft. So the straight, strong order of the grid is changing to the soft, organic order. And then again, we have a nice mixture of the nature and the natural order and architectural order. And this transparency is quite important for me because you could feel the natures and the weathers, the different climate, even from inside of the pavilion. So yeah, because of this grid, we could get such a transparency and a nice mixture of the nature and architecture and something like that. Of course, this series of the Pavilion of Serpentine Gallery is a great history for me, for younger generation, I think. And yeah, we can say it's a kind of a dream of the younger architects to be selected as an architect. So I was so excited about that, but at the same time, it's a kind of a big pressure. And yeah, of course, I started to enjoy the whole situation and the whole challenge. And for me, a nice experience to do the project in abroad, in a different situation than Japan. And finally, it's a public project, so we could expect many different kinds of people can see and can experience and can behave in here. So that's quite exciting point.
Well, yeah, thank you for that. So,
It's like a cloud, but of course, from the beginning, I didn't think about I like to make a cloud.
sorry there. Yeah, a couple of small technical issues. So, I've been informed there might be a little bit of lag on the stream. So, we'll make sure if they're not there already, that we have links in the description to where you can watch these in their original form in full quality as well. But I think now we're going to play one more of Edward's films. Do you want to introduce this for us quickly?
This was a film, again, that Jim Stephenson and I worked on for EPR Architects, again, a couple of years ago, on a project they were working on Savile Row. We made 3 films for EPR. One was with the ceramicist Kate Malone, who designed the facade of the building. The second was with the ceramicist himself. And then a third film with Kate and the architect discussing the finished project. And yeah, this is it.
Great. And yeah, Jim Stephenson, who you mentioned you're working with, he's in the comments now. So hi to Jim, and look out for his talk, panel talk he's part of tomorrow as well. But without further ado, yeah, I'm going to go into that film now. So turn off our video and I'll start sharing my screen.
So back in 2011, we won the competition for Savile Row, and we approached Kate just because of the local area, because of Savile Row, arts and crafts, the tailoring heritage. So we wanted a handmade building. I suppose none of us knew at the start really what it would entail to do it, but we knew that there was a journey and it was going to be quite exciting, and to start with that. So
there were moments, weren't there? There were moments when we kind of, had we known, we might not have done it, but we're through those, aren't we? It was just an amazing journey, actually.
What I've noticed actually is when the building's been finished, is on the street, has been used, the retail has been used, is that people will stop, take out their iPhones and take a snapshot of the building. Now generally to the general public, buildings are anonymous, they're just formed parts of the street, things that people go in and out of. But this actually brings art onto the street. It's a highly decorated building, but it's very sort of understated, very modern, very contemporary.
I mean, the surface is so rich, isn't it? And it looks, because I normally make pieces that are very ebullient and loud and colourful. To hear you say that it still has this depth and this decorative quality kind of makes sense, because I'm a great, I always decorated things and covered things, and this is pared back, but at the same time it still has this very rich, decorated, elaborate surface.
The crystals are effectively three-dimensional when light hits them visually, so it reflects and reflects the light. And that was always part of it. So, as you say, when the sun shines on it, especially the black-blue tile, it changes from being inky, reflecting the sky, the clouds, to being sort of cobalt and sort of electric blue when the sun is on it.
For me, the sheer craft of every single one of the 10,000 tiles was hand decorated, the glaze was hand sieved, everything is so crafted and so bespoke. To me, it's sort of all together. The fact that the whole surface is all these facets of 30 centimetres squares, and they're not dead on. The precision is really sharp and beautiful, but at the same time there's this sense that it has been made by hand, even hung by hand. The tiles were hung one at a time. And because the road slopes and the building is square, to bridge the area between the bottom of the tiles and the pavement, we actually created this series of metal plinths that are using the pattern from the crystals themselves as the inspiration. And we had this all sand cast in a foundry in Stoke-on-Trent.
A lot of time with public art on buildings is something that is attached at the end and has nothing to do with the context or that. But we collaborated with Kate to create an architectural item that was highly decorated, had a link back to the building. It's a three-dimensional representation of the crystal tiles, and I think that as a finishing piece for the building to sit on the ground like that is great. And again, it's quite rare, so nothing is just added on without a lot of thought, a lot of care, a lot of context. And I hope something like this sort of will set the ground for future other buildings in London and elsewhere for that level of collaboration and that level of attention to detail, and I hope it sort of sets that kind of standard.
Okay, well, yeah, thanks very much for sharing that with us. So I think what we're going to do now is Will is going to show a little bit of his work, and then we'll have questions together at the end so we can have a bit of a conversation between us all. So Will, which film would you like to start with?
Let's start with the Stanton Williams film, the Musée d'Arts de Nantes.
Okay, so while I load it up, would you like to give us a bit of an introduction into the project and
yeah, sure. So this was it was a very specific commission. Stanton Williams were shortlisted, or the project was shortlisted for an award. It was the EU Mies van der Rohe Award, and the film was part of the sort of shortlisting submission. So they had a very specific brief because it was a very specific need, which. Yeah, we had a very tight guide on what they wanted to shoot, what order they wanted to show it in, and that sort of thing. And we also had quite a limited timeline to produce it, but I was really happy with what we managed to come back with.
Okay, great. Well, yeah, let's all take a look then. And then Will, if you'd like to introduce your final film of our screening today, your next film that you're showing.
Sure. So this was a film from a commission at the end of last year, probably the most interesting and challenging commission of my career to date, in Dhaka, Bangladesh. Presented all sorts of challenges weather-wise. The projects themselves were not quite finished, and also just the general environment out there was threw up numerous challenges I hadn't experienced before. But the Stanton Williams film, reason why I chose that first is that one kind of informed how this one looked. The Stanton Williams film really sort of set a bar for how I want my work, my moving image work, to look going forward. So I think this one's quite a nice kind of continuation of that. So here we go.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا استعينوا بالصبر
So sorry, we just had a few technical problems with the audio going there. So I'm going to try that one again from the start, because I think the sound, I haven't watched it before. The sound is really a big part of the atmosphere of this piece. So yeah, thanks for being with us. Going to give this one another go.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا استعينوا بالصبر من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا استعينوا بالصبر والصلاة
So yeah, thanks everyone for bearing with us during the technical difficulties. I'm surprised it's taken us, 9 events in for it to finally have a problem. So yeah, thanks for being with that. And yeah, I guess now, Henry, maybe you'd like to kick us off with some questions for Will and for Edward.
Yeah, definitely. Those are some really fantastic films. So like, really, thank you so much for showing them to us, because yeah, I suppose coming from an architectural photography point of view, and film is something that I've wanted to explore, but I haven't. So it's really great to see you guys like taking the baton and sort of, you know, you're going to uncharted territory, it feels like, in a way. So yeah, it's really, really interesting. I suppose the first question I'd like to kick off with is, in which ways do you think that an architectural film can communicate differently to architectural photos, and what can it bring to a project for an architect? I'd like to put this forward to Will first, if that's all right.
Thanks, Henry. Yeah, good question. I think that the main one for me is the kind of the three-dimensionality you can get from moving with the camera through the space. But I think also the second one is the sound. So both my films there, the sound was a big part of it. The first one with the museum project, that audio was actually taken from the installation that you saw in a couple of the clips. It was kind of hanging from the ceiling, so it was almost like a wind chime effect. But sound really helps draw you into the space.
Was that the first or the second film, Will? I just saw it so I can.
That was the museum film.
The museum, yeah, that's what I thought. There was that kind of intensity.
Yeah, yeah, and it was quite powerful. And then the mosque film, obviously, you had the call to prayer, which was the kind of main audio there, which is quite a powerful thing to hear. And I felt it would be really nice to have that in the background of the film.
We woken up every day like that by the call to prayer. We woken up in the mornings with that.
No, I wasn't.
Do you record the sound yourself, or you use a sound specialist? How do you do with it?
Yeah, so with the museum film, the Stanton Williams film, the audio was provided to me because that installation had finished by the time we went to shoot that space. There was actually a kind of temporary one up that they didn't like, and it meant we didn't get any footage of that area. With the mosque, we recorded audio ourselves, but yeah, I would generally do that myself on a sort of audio recorder, and then obviously you're shooting when you're filming, you're just kind of getting some background noise in there anyway. But I think that this is where, for me, the big difference between photography and filmmaking is the kind of collaborative aspect of it, and I think it's really beneficial to have another set of eyes, an editor on board.
You work with an assistant there, Will, on the films there? Is it purely yourself, or do you have your someone there helping out, or what's going on?
So both films I had someone else alongside me, different people, and they were sort of acting as, yeah, almost like main camera, second camera. I mean, both films are shot on the same camera, actually, Sony FS5, which is a cinema camera, and that's the kind of, I don't have one myself, but I love the kind of look of the camera. Gives that nice shallow depth of field.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Skills, isn't it?
Yeah, it's really beautiful, and you can't get that with a DSLR.
No.
And I'm kind of going for that more sort of cinematic vibe, but not every project suits that, and that's not how I shoot every project. But certainly favoured the two films I've shown there, that approach. So yeah, a 2-camera approach, and then the editor, both in these instances, was the person I had with me, which again I think is quite a good thing to have. Not myself editing, but someone who's on the ground shooting with me.
I noticed as well in the films that there was sort of this narrative, obviously, of following the people who were using the space. I suppose a challenge that I've had in the past while attempting to make some films, but when you just are shooting a building and you don't have anyone inside of it, or it's a new project, then I suppose it comes about the light and about the atmosphere and the space. But I saw in both those films, you were sort of very much following a character, someone or the sound, or it was telling that story. And do you think people are like essential to architectural filmmaking now? Is that a? I
think it really depends. It's project specific, but certainly for the mosque film, I felt it had to be, I wanted it to be a bit more experiential. I don't know about you, but it was the first time I'd ever been into a mosque. So I wasn't familiar with the kind of processes and how that went. And then when I just was, observing how it went, it's obviously quite a sort of powerful thing, what they do. And then hearing the call to prayer. So that seemed like a natural sort of center for the film. And then luckily we had this guy he was one of the elders of the mosque actually, and he was great. It just, and those kind of long tracking shots, I felt they worked really well, especially the kind of side on one, the horizontal one.
Yeah, there's some beautiful ones with the sort of tiles in the background.
Yeah.
They were lovely because you got to experience the architecture, but you're also experiencing how the person's experiencing the space.
Exactly. That's exactly kind of what I was hoping.
Yeah, really lovely.
And I wanted to ask Ed instead, because what he did is a bit different, because going back to the topic of the sound, there was in his videos, both of them, there was a component of interview as well. So that introduces voice and interacting with people talking. So how is that different from what Will did?
Recording a voiceover as part of
in general, like dealing with the sound, but also in the production of the video. I'm sure that's when you interview someone, there's an additional component that comes into play.
I think, and what was interesting about both of the films that I showed was that the interviews were recorded, in a live environment, so there was no way of controlling the sound. There's a lot of ambient noise, which, luckily, contributed to the narrative of both pieces. But when you're making a film and you're recording an interview, ideally you want to try and control the environment that you're recording it in. However, because both of the films there were about essentially about external environments, it didn't really matter. But if you're making a film inside a museum or something like that, traditionally you're going to want to try and find a space which is quiet. You can control the sound, and
Yeah, so you both mentioned about sound. It's obviously incredibly important in filmmaking. It's something we don't experience through photos. So, could you both tell us a bit more about? I mean, Will had a brief explanation, but about like the way that you record it and the thought process you go through. Do you take an approach of putting a recorded track over the top, or how does that work with the sound, or do you work with someone who knows sound maybe better, or I don't know? I think because
sorry, so my background is in filmmaking, in television and documentaries and things, and so I think when I started making architectural films, I knew the process that you go through, which is that you're recording the dialogue of the actors or the people who's being interviewed, and as soon as that finishes, your immediate reaction is, right, everyone stand still. We need to record a wild track for a minute, and the wild track is the atmospheric sound that's happening, in the room or in the external environment, and you record that, absolutely clean, no movement, no voices over the top of it, so that when you're cutting the film later, that can be laid underneath the picture to form some sort of continuity between the editing of the shots that you see on screen, and that is what smooths the narrative out, smooths the flow of the film, and stops the viewer from being taken out of the piece that they're watching. So it's a really important thing to do, because if you try to create some atmos in the edit later from just a sound library or something, it's so hard. It really is. So recording a wild track on location is just paramount.
With that, Ed, then do you think it's important to record the tracks from the specific room or the specific space that you are shooting, or are you quite happy to sort of be a bit more liberal and find a quiet space and take the backing?
No, I mean, it has to be the space that you're recording an interview in, because as soon as you as soon as you record some Atmos in a different room, the sound space is completely different. If you change the microphone that you're recording it with, the sound space is completely different. So literally, the moment the person that you're interviewing, stops talking, or the moment that you stop filming some action, literally everyone stands still, and you just then spend the next minute standing silent, recording this film. And
it's like being on a proper film set then, in that respect, that there are those moments which are like you need, that are going to be.
There's the reason that you do it, and if you don't do it, the editor is just going to be swearing under his breath at you. I mean, I edit all of the content that I make anyway, so I've only got myself to blame if I don't record a wild track. So it's really in my interests to do it.
And a very quick and straightforward one for both of you. How long does it take to produce a 3 minutes video? I think it's really important for the public that is not into filmmaking to know how much work and effort stands behind a 3 minutes video. So, Will?
Yeah, that's a good question. How much does it cost is the other one. I mean, I think...
I'm talking about, both costs, but also, the amount of time. Both of you, go for it.
Yeah, that was just a joke. I think that the edit process with films is a lot more intensive than it is with stills. And I think, following on from what Ed was saying about sound there, the important thing about sound is that it can often, I think he said it softens the kind of bridge between the transition of shots. Because with stills, you're not really thinking in which order is the client going to look at these shots. Does it matter? Does it make a huge difference? Like, probably not. But obviously with the film, that is just integral to how it runs and how you perceive it and how you experience it. So what you could do is you could do an edit of a film, show it to the client, and it can be completely different from what they're expecting. I've never had that with stills, and I think that for everyday shooting, there's at least 1 day editing, in my experience, and often if you've got a 2-man crew shooting, then it's probably going to be 2 days editing to 1 day shooting. But it really depends on the project.
Coming back to that point about clients and filmmaking, because obviously, I mean, I think we listened to Jim a couple of days ago talk about what was it? Sort of the fact that it's not a new. I mean, filmmaking and architecture has been around. He was saying since the 40s and 50s, but we've had this lull again now, and then more recently we've seen it kind of a resurgence of it. But I feel like now our clients sort of I don't mean to be rude, but uneducated in the respect of they haven't had a lot of films to look at. I mean, we all see images all day long, about architecture and whatnot. So with the perception of exactly how you said, like they don't know how the sort of timeline is going to run or the view you're taking. It's a real artistic thing, and maybe the expectations are different. And I mean, can you speak a bit more about that? If you understand what I'm getting with that. I always have, just going back to that last point really quickly, I always have a rule of thumb, which is a 1 day shoot, 2 day edit. And I think that's always a really good rule of thumb. Try to limit the amount of amends that the client's allowed to do, or at least let them know at which point that you will start charging for amends, because you can tweak films for days and days and days, as I'm sure Will knows. If you're then going to add some sound design, I mean, the sound design on both of Will's films there was absolutely beautiful. If you're going to add sound design, that's probably another day as well. So, it's certainly three days, maybe 4, depending on how much work is done afterwards. But
sticking to the practical side of the thing, we know that, well, it depends on how a photographer works, but it can be easily a one-man band job. But I guess that filmmaking is a bit more complicated. So in an ideal world, what's the composition of a team for a film production?
I think, sorry, Will.
I think for me it's a minimum 2. I had, when I first started, I was just doing everything on my own. And actually, when I first started, I wasn't even shooting video because my camera couldn't shoot video. I was just doing time lapses and stills, which is even more complicated because obviously you have to leave the camera in place. Yeah, so for me, a 2-man, if not a 3-man crew would be ideal. And I'd almost be in like the directing spot with a main camera and a B camera. But that isn't realistic on 95% of jobs. So, you know, a 2-man crew with a main camera and then a B camera is kind of my ideal setup. And I think that the feedback that I get from my clients is they like the fact that I can shoot video and stills. So, you know, I'm often expected to do both. And that's where having, if the main camera is, you know, a cinema camera like the FS5 or whatnot, and I've got my camera, which is A7R or 2, then I can do both stills and video on that relatively easily. I can switch between the two. And I've not, a lot of the shots that you saw in my 2 films were done on, you know, handheld gimbals, Ronins, but that's very difficult. If you've got your camera on there, it's quite difficult changing from that to a tripod, you know, so hold on, give me 2 minutes, change this, especially when you're trying to capture those little moments that are a bit more natural than maybe the one in the mosque that I showed, which was all obviously set up. So I generally have my camera on a tripod with maybe a rig with a monitor, microphone and whatnot, but it's easy enough for me to change to stills mode and try and capture a still. And then obviously then the other option is if you're shooting 4K, especially, you can frame grab and take that as a still, which would do, you know, sort of if you absolutely had to use it. But yeah, it's a 2-man crew. You're putting yourself under quite a lot of pressure to deliver stills and video, but that's kind of what I'm used to.
I definitely agree with you. I think a two-man crew is invaluable. If you're shooting, particularly if you're shooting an interview and you want to shoot 2 camera angles on an interview and it's just you or it's just me, you know it's going to be a stressful day. You're going to be operating and monitoring 2 cameras. You're also going to be monitoring the sound. You'd have to have somebody else there doing the interview because you just couldn't do that as well. So I think a 2-man crew means that you've got 1 person on each camera, and that's almost a need to have, because sometimes clients will say to me, "Oh, well, can you put a camera over there and then another camera over there?" And I'll say, "I can, but I can only monitor this camera. If the interview is 10 minutes long, I don't want to go back to the camera over there when we finish and realize that was a fault and we've got to do it again." So it's really important. I think if you're doing some really involved sound design as part of your edit as well, then bringing a sound recordist along is invaluable as well. I mean, I think we as photographers and filmmakers, we concentrate a lot on stills and moving image, and we record the sound because we're there, and maybe the budget doesn't allow for a sound recordist as it used to do in years gone by, and to actually be able to have a sound recordist who knows what they're doing and you can just hand that part of the process over to them is invaluable. I think as well, recording an interview, particularly on 2 cameras, is probably one of the things that I think takes a film where you've got some talking heads to another level. I mean, there are lots of toys that you can bring in terms of sliders and gimbals and drones, but I think in terms of a straight up interview, a 2-camera interview not only allows you room to cut back and forth around the interview and edit, but I really think it just takes things to another level on screen.
Ed, so do you think, because we watched your Serpentine film and it was some amazing angles which I really enjoyed, do you think with film work it gives you a more creative freedoms because you've got these sliders, you've got these movements with the camera, and do you enjoy the fact that you have a bit more freedom? Yeah,
I mean, I know I watched Jim's interview yesterday, so I hope I'm not covering ground that he already did, but there's a difference between a still and moving image, and a still is capturing a moment in time, whereas moving image is capturing the passage of time. And I think that while there is a time and a place for both, and they both have their merits, I think that the one thing that moving image does is shows you the passage of time. And especially if you're moving through an architectural space, watching those planes in the frame move just brings buildings to life in a way that you know, still can do, but just not in the same way.
And do you think that because obviously the building doesn't move, so therefore sometimes you need to add some motion by using the camera and moving through the space, because otherwise an architectural structure is just there, or is there okay having the sort of the silence and sort of just observing the structure?
I think they both have a time and a place. I think maybe you know, I'm kind of riffing a bit, but maybe the change in architectural photography, where it used to be very traditional, there was that you didn't want to have any people in frame, it was just very still and locked off. I think, you know, that I think has the change in architectural photography, where you've now got people in space using the space, which seems to make complete sense now. It lends itself to video being a valid medium in capturing you know, architecture, because you want to move through the space, you want to see people using the space, and in filming, you know, either with you know, actors or just you know, general people moving through the space, you can see it in use, and that is something that you know, is invaluable, I think, because you know, that's what kind of how we want to portray buildings, I think, a lot of the time.
And Will, what do you think about that then? Do you think it's sort of better to take a locked off approach, or you think you use both, or you like, I saw a lot of movement through your film, so.
Yeah, I think that, as I said, it's project specific, isn't it? And it depends what you're trying to say with the film. I've done plenty of work that's featured more tripod-based stuff, or maybe a slider for just a little bit of movement. You know, sometimes I think the difficulty transitioning from a photography background will be, your instinct is, I've got to keep all the perspective correct. Got my shift lens, I'm on my tripod. As soon as you try and take your camera off a tripod, it's almost impossible to retain that 100% of the time. So you kind of need to, it's a bit of like a mental block to get over that. If you want to go the route of a bit more free flowing. But yeah, I think going back to what Ed said as well about how architectural photography used to be, I think it's quite an interesting time for architectural imagery in general. You know, the rules aren't really set for motion work, for architecture, for the built environment, just because there's not a great deal of it out there. So what I often get is people will just give me a sort of an open book. You know, they don't know what to expect. They're just, what do you want to do? What do you think? And I almost never get that with stills. You know, these I'm getting exactly. They're getting a checklist of, we need this shot for because it's good on Instagram. We need this. We need that. So I think that, you know, the films offer huge potential for originality, but it is a question of the budgets need to be a bit higher, because there's so much more work that's involved. Potentially a lot more gear that's involved, potentially a lot more people, more people involved. So it's not appropriate for every project, and it's, you know, it's not necessary, that approach either. But it's certainly, I think that the other thing is where are you showing the film? You know, social media, Instagram. I know there's been a lot of chat about. I've been sort of dropping in and out of the other events over the last couple of days. There's been a lot of chat centered around Instagram, but you know, there's other places where, you know, people are engaging with imagery, and you know, it's not all about Instagram, is it? But one thing I get a lot from architects is, and going back to your point about are architects slightly uneducated or behind the times, they say, I love the idea of a film, but where am I going to use it?
Right, exactly. Where am I going to put it? Where is it going to go?
You've got a website, you've got social media profiles, obviously it can go there. But to use it, or depends on the imagery, but often it requires a change of website, maybe, if people are trying to integrate motion imagery in the homepage, for example, or maybe they don't want to show a whole film, they just want to show 10-15 second clips. So I think there's a huge potential for it, but it is, yeah, it's a tricky one to get right.
What are some of the platforms then that you guys would approach? Let's say if you want to get your film out there or your client's film out there, maybe if they're confused and they don't know where it would go, what are there some other platforms or blogs or websites that are particularly great for getting architects' work out there, film work?
I'm not sure. I think a lot of people right now are looking for video content and just they want to stick their badge on it and stick it up on their platform.
So quite sort of within the companies.
Yeah, well, not necessarily, but just within sort of the normal places that they're all seeing our stills work published. I think that there's like YouTube's probably a big untapped resource. There's not, to my knowledge, too many YouTube channels sort of dedicated to the built environment, at least as to my knowledge. I think that there's so many other amazing ones that I see, and I just think, why has no one done something on the built environment in a really engaging way? You know, people, they do say that architecture's got a communication problem, and whenever you think of how architects are portrayed in the media and film, it's obviously quite negatively. So, you know, I think that could be an opportunity, but yeah, again, it takes time, it costs money, doesn't it?
I think, sorry to interrupt. I think certainly, I think Jim and I have found when we've made films that perhaps not the more traditional platforms like Dezeen are kind of waiting with open arms to take it. But what happens is we get a lot of people from film festivals, architectural film festivals, coming to us saying that we're putting this festival on. We found your work and we would love to show it. You know, how much have you got? What can we show? And I think possibly things like Arch Film Fest and LFA are good places for content like that. So I think it might not necessarily be that once the film's finished you think, okay, where who do we approach to show it? But I think once you have it online somewhere, build it and they will come, because
I think there's a good there's a desire out there, and I think there needs to be more content made by more architectural photographers than in filmmaking, and you guys are doing a great job. So thanks very much for telling us about that.
Going back to the differences between photography and filmmaking, I think that when we take a photograph, we are in a very controlled environment. So we place the camera, we decide the scene, we stage the scene, and if there's something that can't be adjusted in that moment, we know that there's the chance of the post-production to fix some minor issues. But with filmmaking, everything is moving, and Photoshop doesn't really come into this play. So is this an additional element of freedom, or it's a constraint, the fact that you can't have all the rules of photography?
Well, it can be a bit of both, can't it? I know, actually, watching back the Moss film, I noticed something in one of the clips that really irritated me. And I don't think anyone else would have noticed it. And I'm not going to say what it is.
Yeah, exactly.
don't go checking. It's you can fix things. You'd be surprised at how easy it is to fix something. But it's just more time, isn't it? Yeah, I think for me, that's what I was going back to. I'm not overly concerned about getting perfect perspective if I'm moving the camera, and it's that kind of thing. It is quite liberating in some ways. But the other thing is that there's so many technical aspects that you need to have got right. So like Ed was saying, if he was monitoring, say, 2 cameras, and 10 minutes later, he looks at one and, the microphone's not on, or the frame rate's wrong, or something like that, and he's effectively completely ruined. You just don't have that with stills. You shoot something, you look at it, you know if it's right or wrong. Worst case scenario, maybe you bump the ISO a bit more than you'd like, but it's still usable.
What's the worst mistake you guys have had? Like I did it the other day. I think I put my frame rate up to 60 FPS, and that was a nightmare then because I wanted the film to be at 24, shot some at 24, some at 60. So what's the worst sort of technical bump you've come into?
The worst one I'm definitely not going to say because it was really bad. Yeah, the camera I thought was running and it wasn't.
Oh,
and it was something that I was there specially to document. It only happened once.
Okay, and Ed?
I got around it in the edit, I think. Anyway, but moving swiftly on.
Yeah, exactly.
I use a variety of cameras, and generally when shooting an interview, I'll use a camera that records the picture and the sound rather than a DSLR where you've got to record the sound externally and then sync them up later. And Jim and I were making made a documentary on Cold Drops Yard in King's Cross, and we were using DSLRs for the day, and we were recording an interview, and about a minute into the interview I looked and realized, oh God, I've forgotten to start recording the sound. And so you've got to just put your hands up and just say, look, you know, technical fault, my problem, we need to go again. And it's just that thing. And you know what, it's drilled into you on traditional film sets. You hear it, and you hear it 100 times a day, and you hear the first AD say, right, roll cameras, and then you hear camera speed, sound speed, and you know everything that should be recording is recording. And that's something that I've carried over into my architectural filmmaking, is that, you know, I will start the DSLR and I'll say film speed, I will start the zoom and I will say sound speed, and I'm doing it for myself as much as for anyone else, because I know if I say those two things, I know that I'm recording picture and I'm recording sound, and I've got them both later. But on that particular day, I didn't do it, and yeah, you just gotta hold your hands up and always my bad, you know.
You had your Game of Thrones coffee cup moment.
And the very last one before going to Luke, that I'm sure is going to have some Q&A. So we all know that the filmmaking market in architecture is growing because it's become more accessible. But I'd be curious to know, from your experience in the last years, how much work do you get between photography and filmmaking in percentage, let's say, roughly?
Will, do you want to?
Okay, that is a good question. I've never sat down, I don't think, and fully worked it out. Thing is, a lot of my commissions are a bit of both. So sometimes the stills, it was initially stills, and then I'll, you know, manage to upsell a bit of video or suggest a bit of video, and sometimes it's the opposite. I think that, as I said before, I know that people like the fact that I can do both, and although ideally I am having a two-man crew, I can do it on my own if necessary. So that's quite a big selling point, I think. But yeah, I think that it also depends. Sometimes I make a point of trying to promote the films, and then other times I sort of decide it's too much work and I need to get some more stills work, because you know, the films are a lot to think about, and it's a lot to take on, especially when I'm filming and editing myself. You know, if you have a couple on the go, it can get too much. So yeah, that's, as you know, as Ed knows, it's much better working alongside someone else. So
there's something, you know, there's something to be said for having an assistant on shoots, but there's something to be said for working with an equal on shoots, because you bounce stuff back and forth between each other. You know, Jim and I are on a shoot, and you know, we're you know, bouncing ideas off each other about what shots we think would work, and you know, one of you gets an interesting shot and says to the other one, oh, you know, have a look at this, and it's really nice actually having that symbiotic, you know, relationship on a shoot. I enjoy that very much. But yeah, I think in terms of the division of work, for me, it's probably 50-50. Some shoots I'm shooting film and video, some shoots it's one or the other. And quite often, you know, I come back from a still shoot and think, oh, I wish they'd asked me to shoot a bit of video on that, because I could have done something really nice. And vice versa. You know, on a video shoot, I come back and I'm cutting and think, oh, I'd love to have actually, you know, been asked to take some stills for that. So it it goes both ways. But I think if you're lucky, when the stills work is quiet, maybe the odd video job comes in, and vice versa, and
That's great. That's really great. Thank you so much, Edward and Will, for sharing it with us now. So I think we're going to have Luke come on and wrap it up for us and tell us a bit.
Yeah. So yeah, we've had lots of nice comments in the YouTube live. People, so yeah, it's got really impressive work, and thank you both for sharing that. So I think an interesting observation is when the first 2 film screenings we've done this program, they've both been with photographer filmmakers, and later in the program we're doing people from more of a cinema background. So it will potentially be quite interesting to compare and contrast those different styles. We've had a lot of questions about gear and that kind of stuff, and kind of building on that, I went to ask. So a lot of a big change in the video industry is the photography technology coming into it. So the video DSLR and so on. Do you think maybe there's with architectural photographers, we're often tied down by our tripods, and in your video with the motion work, you're using lots of different stabilization methods and so on. Do you think maybe there's an opportunity for some of that video technology to start coming back into photography now?
Is that aimed at me, is it?
To either of you, yeah.
Yeah, good question. I think most these days, I'm not sure, is there any DSLR that can't shoot video? Probably not. You could start doing it with whatever you have. I'm pretty sure most photographers out there can do it right now. The gimbals have come down in price. You can get a pretty decent one for a few £100. So many people are shooting mirrorless these days. They're so small. I think it is pretty accessible. The editing side of it is, the technology is one thing, you're having Premiere Pro or Final Cut or whatever your software is, but it really is a sort of skill in itself. And that's probably where, as often as I can, I'm getting someone else to edit my films. So rather than the gear necessary to shoot it, it's really the sort of the skills to take the footage and create something decent that I'm looking for.
I think I definitely agree there, Will, and follow up saying that if you're in the position of being able to pass the edit on to somebody and essentially tell them what you need, that's a fantastic thing. I think there's a real skill in filmmaking in terms of learning how to tell a story through an edit, and I think as a filmmaker, it's something you learn probably through the edit process. You learn when you're trying to cut something together, the shots that you need to tell that story, and the more times you edit something, you go out into the field knowing the shots that you want in order to tell that story. So I know, all right, to get from here to here, I'm going to need a shot that does this, or if I'm going to cut away at this point of the interview, I need something to cut away to. And I think that process of becoming an editor informs what it is you shoot, and I think it then informs if you're in the fortunate position to be able to hand off your footage to an editor, you're able to tell them how you want the narrative to flow, why you've shot the shots that you have, and what they're there for. And I shot something quite recently. It was a film that I was hoping we might be able to show today, but it's still embargoed, so we can't. But I was shooting it knowing that somebody else was editing it, and while I was shooting it, I was thinking, how's he going to get from here to there? I really need to try and find some other shots for him so that he can cut from there to there. And afterwards, when I handed it over, I said, look, I hope you've got what you need to tell the story, because it was tough, and I was really trying to get that for you. So I think that's definitely a part of the process between the two. That something that comes the more that you do it. in terms of gear, I think the stills gear, or the video gear, no, the other way around. The stills gear really does work with the videos, but the video gear isn't, it doesn't always work when you're out shooting a video and you need to try and catch some stills. And that I wish I had the internal level with me so that I know all my verticals are there and stuff. But those shift tilt lenses you take from the stills onto a video shoot, and they're invaluable. Really are. I think coming from you aren't really considering things like verticals, and I know those, and it's something that you learn as environment that to carry that aesthetic through. And I think, Will, you're certainly saying in the documentary making, you have to try and let that go. And I think I can't let those.
Yeah. And one final question. So another, it's a tool to kind of document truthful and kind of show things as they are. And in Will's project, I noticed you